Amara had always been the kind of woman people admired. From the outside, she seemed to live the dream life every young woman in Accra would envy. She was married to Kwame, a charming and ambitious man, and together they looked like the perfect couple. Whenever they attended church on Sundays or family gathering, they held hands, smiled for photos, and everyone whispered about how blessed they were. Friends would point to them as an example of love done right. But what people didn't see was the heavy price Amara had paid for that picture-perfect image. She had once dreamed of running her own fashion brand, sketching designs late into the night with passion in her eyes. When Kwame's career began to take off, she quietly folded those dreams away. She poured her energy into his success, cooking his favorite meals, managing the home, and standing by his side at every milestone. Amara believed that supporting him meant their future would shine even brighter. Behind closed doors, though, things were not as sweet as they looked. The laughter that used to fill their home had slowly faded. Conversations became shorter, moments of affection rarer. Amara felt the change, but she brushed it aside, telling herself that every marriage had seasons. To the world, she kept up appearances, determined to protect the illusion of their happiness. Deep down, however, a quiet ache had already begun to grow in her heart, one she didn't dare admit, not even to herself. It started with little things Amara almost didn't notice. Kwame, who once came home eager to share the day's stories, now walked through the door with his eyes glued to his phone. Instead of asking about her day, he mumbled a quick, "I'm tired," and sank into the couch, scrolling endlessly. At first, Amara convinced herself it was just work pressure. His company was expanding, and she knew he carried a lot of responsibility. She reminded herself to be patient, to give him space, and to not take it personally. But the little things began to grow. He no longer lingered at the dinner table, praising her cooking the way he used to. Some nights, he didn't even bother to eat. His late nights at the office became the norm, and when he finally returned, his cologne smelled different, unfamiliar. Amara noticed, but quickly silenced the small voice in her head. He's just stressed, she told herself. This is what comes with ambition. Still, the distance was hard to ignore. She would wait up for him, fighting sleep, hoping they could share even a few minutes together. Instead, he'd brush past her with a distracted smile and a curt goodnight. On weekends, when they once went out to the beach or visited friends, Kwame now claimed he needed rest or had urgent meetings. His laughter, once loud and easy, had grown rare. He spoke less, smiled less, and when he did, it often wasn't at her. Amara tried to bridge the gap. She cooked his favorite dishes, wore the perfume he loved, and suggested they take short trips like they used to. But each effort was met with excuses or silence. She even joked lightly about his phone, asking if it had become his second wife. Kwame just chuckled and turned the screen away. That tiny gesture stung more than any harsh word could. Deep inside, Amara felt the shift. She could sense him slipping away, piece by piece, like sand running through her fingers. Yet she refused to believe the worst. Marriage, she reminded herself, required patience and sacrifice. Every man had stressful seasons, and it was her duty to stand by him. So she stayed quiet, swallowing her fears, hoping that tomorrow he would come back to her fully. At night, when he turned his back to her in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her chest heavy with unspoken questions. But she never asked them aloud. Instead, she convinced herself it was temporary, a storm they would weather together. She clung to the memory of who he used to be, the man who once held her hand tightly, who once called her his everything. That memory gave her comfort, even as the coldness between them grew deeper with each passing day. One evening, as Amara folded laundry in the bedroom, she heard Kwame's voice drifting in from the balcony. He had stepped outside to take a phone call, something he'd been doing more often lately. At first, she paid it no mind. But then she caught a name, Naomi. Her hands froze over the clothes. She leaned closer, her heart pounding against her ribs, and what she heard next shattered her world. Kwame's tone was soft, tender, nothing like the coldness he had been showing her. "Don't worry, my love," he whispered. "I'll be there for you and the baby. We'll start our life together soon." The word struck Amara like a knife. A baby. His mistress was carrying his child. She felt the room spin around her, the walls closing in, her chest tight as if she couldn't breathe. For a moment, she thought she might collapse right there on the floor. She pressed her hands against her mouth to stop a cry from escaping. This was the man she had given everything to. She had laid down her dreams, her time, her body, her heart, all for him. And here he was, planning a future with another woman. Her mind flashed back to the nights she had stayed awake waiting for him, the meals she had prepared, the prayers she whispered over their marriage. All of it suddenly felt like a cruel joke. Yet even as tears burned her eyes, Amara stayed still. She didn't rush outside. She didn't confront him. She knew if she let her emotions explode in that moment, he would only twist it, make her feel small, maybe even blame her. So she stayed quiet, listening as he laughed softly with Naomi, promising her the world. The betrayal was sharper than anything she had ever known. When Kwame finally walked back in, he found Amara calmly arranging clothes in the closet. She smiled faintly, though her heart was breaking into pieces. He didn't notice the red in her eyes or the stiffness in her voice. He simply grabbed his keys and said he'd be out for a bit. As the door shut behind him, Amara sat on the edge of the bed numb. That night, she did not sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought of confronting him, of screaming, of demanding answers. But then another thought came: power. If she let her anger control her, she would lose the little ground she had left. So instead, she began to plan. Quietly, she started gathering her strength. She reviewed important documents she had once tucked away. She reminded herself of her worth, the woman she had been before she tied her life to Kwame. The pain was still raw, almost unbearable, but she promised herself one thing: she would not be destroyed. He had made his choice. Now it was her turn to prepare for the day he would regret it. The gathering was supposed to be a celebration. Kwame's family had come together, cousins laughing, aunties cooking, music floating in the background. Amara moved through the crowd with her usual grace, greeting relatives, making sure everyone felt welcome. She had practiced this role for years: the perfect wife, the steady hostess, the woman who held everything together. But beneath her smile, she carried the secret of what she had overheard. Kwame, as always, loved the spotlight. He stood in the center of the room, drink in hand, cracking jokes, drawing laughter. Amara watched him, her face calm though her stomach knotted. She wondered if today he would keep up the performance of being her husband, or if he would finally show everyone the truth she already knew. And then it happened. Kwame cleared his throat and raised his voice so the entire room fell silent. "Family," he began, puffing out his chest. "I have an announcement." Amara's heart skipped. She braced herself. With a proud smile, Kwame said, "I am leaving Amara. She has failed me. Naomi is carrying my child, and she is the woman I will build my future with." The words dropped like a bomb. Gasps filled the room. A few people shifted uncomfortably, others whispered in shock. Amara felt her knees weaken, but she refused to let herself fall. She stood tall, her face blank, even as her heart cracked open. Kwame wasn't finished. He turned toward her, his voice sharp and cruel. "For years I've stayed in this marriage, pretending. But what man can continue with a barren woman? Naomi has given me what Amara never could, an heir." The insult cut deeper than a blade. Amara felt the sting in every cell of her body. She knew the struggles she had faced, the tears she had shed in silence, the nights she prayed for a child. And now, in front of everyone, he had turned her pain into his weapon. Relatives turned their eyes away, some in pity, others in discomfort. The humiliation wrapped around her like fire, but still, she refused to let a tear fall. She lifted her chin slightly, her eyes steady. If Kwame expected her to crumble in front of everyone, he would be disappointed. She would not give him the satisfaction. Instead, she offered a small, polite smile, as if his words had been nothing more than idle chatter. The silence in the room deepened. People waited for her to scream, to defend herself, to collapse. But Amara simply excused herself and walked into the kitchen, her steps calm and measured. Inside, her chest ached with every breath. She wanted to cry, to scream, to throw the plates stacked neatly on the counter. But she pressed her palms against the table and whispered to herself, "Not here. Not now." She would not allow him to see her broken. Kwame had taken her dignity in public, but she still had her strength. And that, she promised herself, was something no one could strip away. Kwame didn't waste any time after the family gathering. Within days, he was stomping through the bedroom, tossing his clothes into suitcases with a smug grin on his face. The man who once begged Amara for her hand in marriage now strutted around like a peacock, humming as he packed his things. Amara sat quietly on the edge of the bed, watching him. She said nothing, not because she was weak, but because she already knew something he didn't. "You should be happy for me," Kwame sneered as he zipped up a bag. "I finally have a better life waiting for me. A woman who can give me what you couldn't. Naomi is my future." His words were sharp, but Amara didn't flinch. She only folded her hands neatly in her lap and gave him a calm nod. Her silence frustrated him, but he mistook it for defeat. When he finally dragged his suitcases out the door, he walked like a man who had won. He didn't look back, didn't pause to wonder how the woman who had once built his world was holding up. Amara followed him to the gate, her face unreadable, her voice steady. "Good luck, Kwame," she said softly. He smirked, as if he had already erased her from his life. Naomi was waiting for him, her belly round, her smile wide. She slipped her arm around his, and together they drove off to what he proudly called their new home. It was a luxurious house, a place Kwame bragged about for months. As they stepped inside, Naomi clapped her hands in delight. "This is ours now," she whispered, kissing his cheek. Kwame puffed out his chest and nodded. "Yes, this is where we'll raise our child. A fresh start." What he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that the house he now flaunted as his prize had never truly belonged to him. Years earlier, when money began to flow in from his business, Amara had convinced him to put the property in her name. He hadn't cared then. What mattered to him was showing off the wealth. He thought nothing of it, believing Amara was simply handling paperwork the way she always did. Now, as Kwame paraded Naomi around the house, opening doors and showing her every corner, Amara's name sat boldly on the document, tucked safely away. He celebrated as if he had conquered something, not realizing he was walking into a cage of his own pride. Naomi stretched out on the sofa, rubbing her stomach, already acting like queen of the palace. Back at her parents' house, Amara sat quietly at the dining table, sipping tea. She had let him go without a fight, because sometimes silence is the strongest weapon. He believed he had stripped her of everything. But soon enough, he would learn that the home he thought was his triumph was never his to claim. The game had only just begun. Naomi wasted no time stepping into her new role. She carried her pregnancy like a trophy, strutting around the neighborhood with her hand resting proudly on her belly. When visitors came to see the new house, she welcomed them at the door with a wide smile, showing them the grand living room, the polished floors, the sparkling chandelier. She made sure everyone knew this was her home now, the place where she and Kwame would start their perfect life. Word quickly spread back to Amara. Some friends, out of pity or curiosity, whispered the updates. Others said it to provoke her, waiting to see if she would finally break down. Naomi herself couldn't resist twisting the knife deep. One afternoon, she called Amara under the guise of clearing the air. Her voice dripped with pride. "You see, Amara," Naomi said, almost singing the words, "I told you Kwame belongs with me. Look at me now. I carry his child, and we live in the kind of house you could never keep him happy in. You wasted all those years, and in the end I won." She laughed lightly, as though Amara were nothing more than a forgotten chapter in a story she had stolen. Amara held the phone in silence, her face calm. Every word stung, but she refused to let Naomi hear it. Instead, she murmured, "I wish you well," and ended the call. On the other side, Naomi laughed louder, believing she had crushed the woman she saw as weak. But Amara had something Naomi didn't know. That same evening, she drove quietly to the office where she had stored important documents. She opened the brown envelope that held the property papers, and there it was, her name, written clearly, boldly, without question. The luxurious house Naomi paraded as hers was legally owned by Amara. For a long moment, she stared at the paper, her heart steadying with each breath. It was as if life had handed her back a piece of power she thought she had lost. She ran her fingers over her name, whispering to herself, "This is mine." The humiliation Kwame and Naomi had thrown at her still burned, but now it mixed with a quiet strength rising inside her. Meanwhile, Naomi continued her victory parade. She posted pictures of her baby bump on social media, tagging Kwame with captions like, "My king, my future." She welcomed friends into her home, pouring drinks, boasting about how she had finally taken the crown. She even threw little jabs at Amara, calling her the barren one who lost. What Naomi didn't realize was that every step she took across that marble floor, every picture she posed for in that living room, every guest she entertained, she was doing it under Amara's roof. The documents in Amara's hands were proof of that. Amara didn't rush to expose the truth. She didn't storm into the house or argue with Naomi. She simply folded the papers back into the envelope, placed it in her bag, and walked out of the office with her head held high. She knew her moment would come, and when it did, the silence she carried now would speak louder than any insult Naomi could ever throw. The day of the party came with all the noise and glitter Naomi loved. She had been planning it for weeks, eager to show off her baby bump and the grand house she thought she had conquered. Cars lined the driveway, music spilled out of the windows, and guests poured in, dressed in their best clothes. Naomi floated from guest to guest, one hand on her stomach, the other wrapped around Kwame's arm, as if to say, "I have it all now." Kwame, too, was in his element. He boasted about the house, about his new beginning, about the child on the way. "God has finally answered me," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I am a blessed man." Guests clapped, laughed, and raised their glasses. Naomi leaned in, her smile wide, basking in the glow of attention. And then the front door opened. Heads turned. Amara stepped inside, dressed with quiet elegance, her poise commanding the room. She didn't need loud colors or heavy jewelry. Her presence alone silenced the chatter. For a moment, you could almost hear people's thoughts racing. What is she doing here? Kwame's face drained of color. Naomi's smile stiffened, though she quickly tried to cover it with a smirk. "Well, well," she said loud enough for others to hear. "Look who couldn't stay away." A few guests chuckled awkwardly, but Amara didn't flinch. She walked slowly into the center of the room, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice calm and clear. The crowd shifted, waiting, sensing something was about to happen. Amara looked around the house with steady eyes, then turned to Kwame and Naomi. I hear congratulations are in order. A baby on the way, a new home, a celebration of fresh beginnings. She paused, letting her words settle. Then, with the faintest smile, she added, There's just one thing I need to clarify. This house belongs to me. The words fell like thunder. The music seemed to stop. Glasses froze midair. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Guests turned to look at Kwame, then Naomi, then back at Amara. Kwame stammered, What do you mean? Naomi laughed nervously, waving a hand. Don't be ridiculous. This is our home. Amara didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She reached into her bag, pulled out the documents, and held them up. Legally, this property is in my name. Every brick, every wall, every window mine. Silence wrapped around the room. Someone gasped. Others whispered. Naomi's face went pale, her hand slipping from Kwame's arm. Kwame stood frozen, sweat breaking across his forehead as the truth sank in. Amara tucked the papers back into her bag with the same grace she had walked in. She didn't gloat, didn't shout. She simply looked at the two of them and said, I thought the guests deserved to know whose house they are standing in. The room stayed hushed. And in that silence, Amara's dignity shone brighter than all the chandeliers Naomi had been so eager to show off. For a few seconds after Amara's words, the party hung in complete silence. The air was heavy, every eye darting between her calm face and Kwame's panic. Then, like a dam breaking, the whispers began. Guests leaned into one another, some shaking their heads, others laughing in disbelief. The same people who had cheered Kwame's new beginning were now looking at him with pity and disgust. Kwame's swagger disappeared in an instant. His proud chest deflated, his lips trembled. He reached out toward Amara, his voice cracking. Amara, please listen, I made mistakes. I was blind. You're the real woman, the real wife. Forgive me, let's fix this. He stepped closer, desperate, his hands shaking as he tried to touch her arm. But Amara simply shifted back, her face calm, her eyes steady. She didn't raise her voice or insult him. Her silence was louder than his begging. That silence told the entire room that she had moved past him, that he no longer had power over her. Naomi, on the other hand, exploded. Her cheeks flushed red as she spun toward Kwame. You didn't tell me this house was hers? You let me walk around like a fool, bragging about a home that isn't even mine. Her voice cut sharp, echoing through the room. She clutched her belly as if it might shield her from the humiliation. You promised me everything. You told me I won. Kwame turned to her, stammering. Naomi, please, it doesn't matter. We can still. But Naomi shoved his hand away, her eyes blazing. It matters to me. You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. The guests didn't hold back now. Some laughed openly. Others muttered things like, serves him right, and after all Amara sacrificed. Aunties shook their heads. Uncles clucked their tongues. The same people who once praised Kwame's ambition now saw only arrogance and downfall. Kwame's knees seemed to buckle under the weight of it all. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands, muttering apologies no one cared to hear. Naomi stood over him, furious, but her anger only made her look smaller next to Amara's quiet strength. Amara didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't gloat. She simply lifted her chin and looked around the room. I wish you all a good evening, she said softly, her voice carrying more power than any scream could. Thank you for celebrating in my home. With that, she turned gracefully, her steps slow and steady, leaving the crowd in awe. People whispered as she walked past, admiration in their voices. In that moment, they saw her not as the weak, barren wife Kwame had mocked, but as a woman of dignity and resilience. Kwame sat collapsed, Naomi raged beside him, and the crowd turned their backs on both. Amara didn't need revenge. Her strength had spoken for her. The ones who dismissed her before were now witnesses to her quiet victory. The morning after the disastrous party, the mood inside the house was nothing like the celebration of the night before. Kwame sat slumped on the couch, his head heavy in his hands, while Naomi paced the floor angrily, muttering insults under her breath. The shine of victory they once wore was gone, replaced by shame and fear. Meanwhile, Amara walked into the property as though she had never left. She held her documents in hand, her steps calm but firm. Kwame, Naomi, she said evenly, you have until the end of the week to leave this house. It is mine, and now everyone knows it. Her tone wasn't harsh, but there was no room for argument. Naomi opened her mouth to protest, but Amara lifted a hand. You've had your fun playing queen. It's over. Kwame tried to plead again. Amara, please don't do this. We can work things out. I was a fool. I see it now. His voice cracked, but Amara didn't waver. She looked at him the way one looks at a stranger, without love, without hate, just distance. By the weekend, their things were being dragged out of the house. Naomi stormed out with her bags, hissing curses under her breath. Kwame lingered, still begging, but Amara didn't bend. She watched them go without triumph, without tears. The chapter was closed. Once the house was quiet again, Amara walked from room to room. She touched the walls, the windows, the furniture. This same house that had witnessed her humiliation now stood as proof of her strength. But instead of dwelling on the betrayal, she saw it as a chance to begin again. She called in workers to refresh the place. New paint, new curtains, new energy. She cleared out every trace of Kwame and Naomi, not out of anger, but to make space for her own life. Slowly, the house began to feel like hers, not just on paper but in spirit. With her home secured, Amara turned her focus inward. She picked up the sketchbooks she had once abandoned, dusted off her sewing machine, and began to design again. Each night, she worked late into the evening, not because she had to, but because she loved it. The same passion she once buried to support Kwame now came alive with every stitch. She registered her business, started small with clients from church and the neighborhood. Word spread quickly. Her talent was undeniable, and people admired her even more for her strength. What had started as whispers of pity after Kwame's betrayal now turned into whispers of respect. Amara didn't waste her time plotting revenge or watching what became of Kwame and Naomi. That was their story to live with. She poured all her energy into her future, brick by brick, design by design, dream by dream. Reclaiming her power wasn't about taking back a house. It was about taking back herself. And for the first time in years, Amara felt free, standing tall in her own light. Months passed, and the house that once carried the sting of betrayal now carried the warmth of peace. Amara walked through the wide hallways with a soft smile, her steps light, her heart steady. The walls, once echoing with Kwame's lies and Naomi's laughter, now held only her own voice, her music, her prayers. Every room she had redesigned reflected her new life, bright, calm, and hers alone. The living room where Kwame had once boasted to guests was now her studio space, filled with fabrics, sketches, and colors that spoke of her dream. The bedroom, once a place of silence and coldness, now felt like a retreat, scented with fresh flowers and sunlight spilling through the curtain. Even the kitchen, where she had cooked countless meals for a man who never appreciated her, was now alive with the joy of cooking for herself, friends, and family who cherished her. As she walked slowly across the polished floor, her fingers brushing the walls, she thought of how far she had come. The humiliation, the pain, the betrayal, it no longer controlled her. What had once been her breaking point had turned into the foundation of her strength. Standing in the middle of the living room, Amara let out a small laugh, soft but full of power. She whispered to herself, "You left me for her, but you both slept under my roof." The words weren't bitter, they were sweet, a reminder of her quiet victory. The house was no longer a prison of memories. It was her sanctuary, her crown, her proof that she had survived and risen. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt not just alive, but free.